A modern synthetic tent is washed away by the first heavy downpour, leaving the tourist wet and cold. But Indian camps made of skins and poles remain completely dry inside for weeks under torrential rains. Why were these seemingly primitive dwellings more perfect than modern engineering solutions? The answer lies not in the materials, but in forgotten principles of working with the landscape and the physics of water. They understood that it was useless to fight the elements, and instead made water work according to their rules. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how ancient builders used the invisible laws of hydraulics to stay warm in the midst of a raging storm. What if I told you that everything you believed was wrong, and that Native Americans never set up camp in the most beautiful place? Choosing a place to camp was a complex calculation on which the life of the entire tribe depended. They never stopped in lowlands or at the bottom of canyons, even if it was windless and cozy there. Experienced trackers knew that during a rainstorm, these places turned into deadly traps with raging mudflows. Any depression on the plain could potentially become a lake in just 1 hour of heavy rain. They were looking not just for a flat place, but for an area with hidden relief that was invisible to the untrained eye. The ideal site was always on high ground, but not at the very peak, exposed to all winds. It was the so-called middle terrace, which rose above the level of the river, but was protected by hills. This location ensured that rainwater would flow downhill rather than accumulate underfoot. Even in complete darkness, scouts could determine the suitability of a place by the sound of footsteps and the density of the soil. The location of each dwelling in the camp circle was also not random or chaotic. The entrance always faced east toward the rising sun, but this also had practical significance. On the Great Plains, prevailing winds and rains usually came from the west, hitting the strongest rear wall of the dwelling. This orientation minimized moisture entering through the entrance flap. If the wind changed, the entire structure could withstand the pressure thanks to its aerodynamic shape. Interestingly, they avoided areas with tall, thick grass, preferring areas with dense turf. Tall grass retained moisture after rain, creating dampness that would penetrate the dwelling. Dense, short turf, on the other hand, acted as natural drainage, quickly allowing water to pass through it. They literally read the surface of the earth as we read a map, seeing the paths of water movement. A mistake in choosing a location could result in people waking up in icy water at night. Particular attention was paid to proximity to the river, but with strict safety distances observed. The camp was set up close enough to carry water, but far enough away to avoid sudden flooding. The water level in the rivers of the plains could rise several meters in a matter of hours after a thunderstorm in the mountains. The Indians knew very well the signs of an impending flood from the behavior of birds and the color of the water. Safety was prioritized over comfort, so the camp was always prepared for the worst-case scenario. Trees served as natural protection, but they were also chosen with great care. A lone tall tree was a magnet for lightning, so camp was never set up under such giants. Preference was given to groves of young, flexible trees that broke the wind but did not fall. They created a natural barrier that slowed raindrops and deflected the main air currents. The ground beneath their feet was checked for firmness, avoiding loose sand and sticky clay. On sand, the stakes holding the dwelling in place could fly out at the first strong gust of storm wind. Clay, on the other hand, became slippery when wet and did not allow water to pass through, creating puddles right inside the dwelling. Rocky soil or tightly compacted earth with good water permeability was ideal. The entire structure of the camp was designed to allow water to flow freely between dwellings. Tents were never placed close to each other so as not to create dams for rainwater. Passages were left between them, which turned into miniature channels during heavy rain. Water had to flow freely through the camp, encountering no obstacles and no delays. This was collective knowledge, passed down from generation to generation and honed over centuries of nomadic life. Every man in the tribe knew how to choose a safe place for his family to spend the night. The women who set up the dwellings could adjust the location if they sensed a hidden threat. It was a double-checking system that ruled out fatal mistakes. Have you ever wondered how safe the place is where you pitch your tent on vacation? Please share your thoughts on this, because every opinion is valuable. Are you ready to learn the truth about how a simple slope saved lives? The secret to a dry camp was to use the natural slopes of the terrain, which were almost invisible to the eye. The Indians never leveled the ground under their dwellings to a perfectly horizontal state, as modern tourists do. On the contrary, they looked for micro-slopes that would provide natural water drainage. Even a slope of a couple of degrees caused the water to drain away rather than accumulate under the sleeping areas. Inside the dwelling itself, the floor also often had a slight slope toward the exit. This ensured that if water somehow got inside, it would flow out rather than form a puddle in the center. It was a simple but ingenious solution that used gravity as the main cleaner. They did not fight the water but gave it a way to escape. Around each dwelling, nature itself formed a system of microchannels, which the builders skillfully utilized. They placed their conical houses so that natural hollows flowed around them on both sides. The water flowing down from the hills encountered an obstacle and split into two streams, bypassing the residential area. It resembled the flow around a rock in a river, only instead of a rock, there was a camp. They took particular care to ensure that the entrance to the dwelling was at the lowest point of the perimeter. This prevented water from flowing inside, even in strong winds that drove the streams along the ground. Water always flows along the path of least resistance, and the Indians made sure that this path led away from the house. The entrance thus became the endpoint of the drainage system for a particular dwelling. If there was not enough natural slope, it could be created artificially by adding soil in the right places. Additional layers of branches were laid under the sleeping areas, creating an elevation above the general floor level. This created dry islands of safety, even if water was flowing across the floor itself. This approach allowed people to sleep warmly, even when the elements were raging outside. They understood the physics of flows perfectly and knew that water gains speed on long slopes. Therefore, camps were often set up on terraces that interrupted the acceleration of rainwater. Each terrace took on only the water that fell directly on it. This prevented the formation of powerful mudslides that could wash away the camp. In winter, these same slopes helped to drain meltwater away from campfires and sleeping areas. When the snow began to melt from the heat of the hearth, the water drained into the ground or flowed toward the exit. This prevented the formation of an ice crust inside the dwelling at night when the fire died down. A dry floor in winter was a matter of survival, not just comfort. Observing anthills and rodent burrows often revealed the best places with the right slope. Animals instinctively chose places that would not flood even during the heaviest rains. The Indians trusted the animals' instincts more than their own eyes and often set up camp near such natural markers. Nature itself indicated safe areas. One only needed to be able to see these signs. The use of slopes made it possible to avoid the laborious digging of deep ditches around each dwelling at temporary camps. If the terrain worked correctly, no additional earthworks were required. This saved energy and time, which were so important in a nomadic lifestyle. Efficiency was achieved through wisdom, not hard physical labor. In the next chapter, you will learn how they determined soil quality by touch and why this was so important. I discovered this by accident while studying old ethnographic records, and it turned my understanding of site selection upside down. It turns out that Native Americans conducted a real geological analysis of the soil before setting up camp for a long time. They knew that black soil and clay were their worst enemies during rain, as they retained water on the surface. Clay instantly turned into sticky mud, which made life in the camp unbearable. Therefore, they looked for areas with a high content of rocky soil or sand under the turf. Such soil acted like a giant sponge, instantly absorbing falling water and carrying it away into deep layers. Even after a heavy downpour, the surface of such soil remained relatively dry and firm. They tested the soil by sticking sticks or knives into it to understand the structure of the soil at depth. If the knife entered with difficulty and greasy mud remained on the blade, the site was rejected without regret. Preference was given to places with a thick carpet of steppe grass, whose roots created a reinforcing mesh. This root system prevented the mud from becoming soggy and turning into a swamp under the feet of hundreds of people and horses. The grass acted as a natural mat, lifting the inhabitants above the damp ground. Trampling of grass in the living area was strictly controlled so as not to disturb this protective layer. In wooded areas, they looked for areas covered with a thick layer of pine needles or fallen leaves. The coniferous litter was an ideal insulator that did not rot and allowed moisture to pass through it perfectly. Water seeped into the sand beneath the needles, leaving the top layer dry and clean. In addition, the pine needles gave off a pleasant aroma and protected against the cold coming from the ground. They avoided places where the ground was covered with cracks, knowing that this was a sign of drying clay. When it rained, these cracks would first fill with water, and then the entire surface would turn into an impassable mess. They also avoided areas with a white salt coating, knowing that such harsh soil does not absorb moisture well. Their knowledge of soil chemistry was intuitive, but absolutely accurate and practical. Sometimes, to improve drainage, they would bring river sand and sprinkle it on the floor inside their dwellings. This was done when they planned to stay in less than ideal conditions for a long time. The sand not only absorbed moisture, but also made it easy to keep the floor clean by renewing the top layer. It was a kind of replaceable bedding that could be easily changed. Interestingly, they could distinguish between different types of soil even by the plants that grew on them. Certain types of grass indicated swampiness or poor drainage, even if the soil appeared dry on the surface. Other plants, on the contrary, were indicators of dry and warm areas suitable for habitation. Botany and geology merged into a single science of survival in the wild. They never set up camp on old fire sites where the ground was baked and covered with ash. When wet, the ash turned into caustic alkaline mud that ruined shoes and clothes. In addition, such soil did not absorb water well, creating black puddles throughout the camp. The cleanliness of the site was essential for the health and safety of the entire tribe. Even the temperature of the ground was important. Cold, damp soil could drain all the strength from a sleeping person. They chose areas that were well warmed by the sun during the day and retained heat at night. Rocky plateaus often served as such natural heat accumulators. The ability to read the ground beneath one's feet was no less important than the ability to read animal tracks. It was the foundation on which the well-being of the entire community was literally built. If the ground rejected water, people also rejected that ground for their homes. Don't forget to like this if you are surprised by such thoughtfulness. Want to know a secret that will change your life if you find yourself in the wilderness without a modern tent? The main weapon against water flow was not the roof over your head, but the ditch dug around it. It was not just a hole, but a precisely calculated engineering drainage system. The ditch was dug strictly along the perimeter of the dwelling, just below the edge of the roof, where the water flowed. The depth of such a ditch was usually only a palm's width, but this was enough to intercept the entire flow from the roof. The walls were made steep so that the water would not erode the edges and wash away the frame stakes. The earth removed from the ditch was laid in a roller on the inside, creating an additional barrier. This earthen embankment was compacted, turning it into a miniature dam. The most important part of this system was the drainage channel that led from the circular trench down the slope. Without it, the ditch would simply fill with water and turn into a moat flooding the dwelling. The drainage channel was dug with a constant slope, carrying water several meters away from the camp. This ensured that the moisture would not return even in strong winds. During periods of prolonged rain, the ditch system could be deepened and widened by connecting the trenches of neighboring dwellings. This created a unified drainage network for the entire camp, discharging water to a safe place. This required the coordinated work of all residents, but the result was worth it. The camp remained an island of dryness in the middle of the soggy steppe. The bottom of the ditches was often lined with flat stones or bundles of stiff grass. This prevented the soil from being washed away by the fast flow of water and the channel from silting up. The water ran over the stones without being absorbed into the ground near the dwellings. This lining made the drainage system durable and reliable. The tools used for digging were shovels made from bison shoulder bones or pointed sticks made from hard wood. The work was hard, but the women did it masterfully and very quickly. Protecting the house from water was considered one of the top priorities when setting up camp. Not digging a ditch before a storm was considered the height of carelessness and stupidity. In winter, these same ditches helped insulate the lower edge of the dwelling from snowdrifts. Snow sliding down the sloping walls fell into the depression and created additional wind protection. In the spring, when the snow melted, the ditch diligently drained the water away. The system worked all year round, adapting to different weather conditions. Particular attention was paid to the junction of the drainage channel with the general terrain. They tried to discharge water into thick grass or shrubs so as not to cause soil erosion. Caring for the land was part of their worldview, even when it came to sewage. They tried not to leave deep scars on the body of the earth. Even temporary shelters for hunters were often dug according to the same principle, but in a simplified form. A simple furrow cut with a knife could save a sleeping place from flooding. This skill was instilled in every boy from early childhood. Knowledge of hydraulics was the key to a warrior's survival. But a ditch is only half the battle, because water also falls from above. You will learn more about how the shape of a dwelling helped to combat wind and rain later on. The shape of the traditional dwelling of the Plains Indians is a triumph of engineering over the forces of nature. The cone is one of the most stable geometric shapes, capable of withstanding wind from any direction. The wind simply flows around the sloping walls, pressing the structure to the ground rather than overturning it. The stronger the wind blew, the more firmly the dwelling stood, as if growing into the ground. The steep slopes of the walls did not allow water to linger for a second, instantly throwing it down. Unlike flat roofs, there was no place here where a puddle could accumulate and leak inside. Every drop that fell on the top rolled rapidly to the ground, falling directly into the drainage ditch. The flow was so fast that the water simply did not have time to soak through the skin. The frame of poles was designed so that the load was distributed evenly throughout the structure. Even if one pole broke or bent under the weight of the wet hide, the others held their shape. The bundle of poles at the top acted like a keystone in an arch, holding everything together. This flexibility allowed the dwelling to breathe under the gusts of the storm without breaking. The cover, made of sewn bison skins, was stretched over the frame with incredible force, like skin on a drum. The tightly stretched skin did not flap in the wind or form folds where water could accumulate. The tension was adjusted with pegs at the base, driving them deeper if necessary. It was a dynamic system that could be adjusted to the weather. The seam connecting the edges of the cover was always located on the side of the entrance opposite the wind. The wooden pins holding the seam together were made so that water ran down them without getting inside. Every element of the structure, every detail, worked to remove moisture. No unnecessary holes or gaps were allowed in critical areas. The conical shape also ensured ideal heat exchange inside the room in wet weather. Warm air from the fire rose up along the walls, drying them from the inside. This created an air cushion that prevented moisture from penetrating from the outside. The dwelling dried itself as long as the fire burned in the center. The height of the cone allowed smoke to rise unhindered, without lingering in the living area. Even if the top opening had to be covered from the rain, the draft was maintained thanks to the height. This made it possible to keep the fire going even in the heaviest downpour. Without fire, it would have been much more difficult to survive in wet weather. The absence of vertical walls made the dwelling invulnerable to slanting rain, which is so dangerous for modern tents. The drops always hit tangentially, losing their destructive force of impact. This significantly extended the service life of the tire material. The leather wore less and retained its water-repellent properties longer. The entrance itself was made oval and raised above the ground to create a threshold. This threshold was another barrier to water and dirt trying to get inside. A door flap made of a separate skin fits snugly against the opening, sealing the entrance. Even the arrangement of furniture and belongings inside took into account the round shape and slope of the walls. Everything valuable and susceptible to moisture was stored closer to the center or suspended. The walls were used as backrests for sitting, but people slept a little further away from them. Are you ready for the shocking truth that Native American dwellings had double walls? Many people think that teepees are just a single layer of animal skins, but this is a gross misconception. Inside, along the bottom of the walls, an additional canvas called an ozon, or lining, was stretched. This interior wall, which was as tall as a person, played a key role in protecting against rain and cold. It was attached to poles from the inside, creating an air gap between the outer covering and the living space. If water did seep through the outer skin or run down the poles, it would fall behind this lining. The drops would roll down it directly to the ground, bypassing the sleeping areas and belongings. The inhabitants remained dry, even if streams of water ran down the outer wall. In addition to draining water, this lining provided powerful thermal insulation thanks to the thermos effect. Cold and damp air remained behind the barrier, while warm air from the fire circulated inside. This allowed people to sit in light clothing even in cold, rainy weather. The temperature difference inside and outside this thin wall was enormous. The lining also protected against drafts, which inevitably penetrated under the bottom edge of the outer cover. The wind blowing from below went up between the two layers of leather, creating additional draft for the smoke. It was an ingenious ventilation system that worked for comfort. Fresh air came in, but did not cool the room. Softer and thinner skins, or even fabric obtained through trade, were used as lining material. They were often decorated with drawings and ornaments, telling the story of the family or the exploits of a warrior. This turned a utilitarian item into an important element of the interior. Beauty and functionality went hand in hand. The upper edge of the lining could be equipped with a special visor hanging over the sleeping places. This ceiling caught rare drops that could fall from above through the smoke hole. Water accumulated on it and evaporated without reaching people. It was the last line of defense against rain. Installing the lining was a mandatory procedure in preparation for winter or the rainy season. In summer, during intense heat, it could be removed or lifted for ventilation. This modularity made the dwelling universal for any climate. The Indians changed the configuration of their homes as easily as we change our clothes. The space behind the lining was used to store firewood and rough tools. The fire would always remain dry and ready for use, which was critically important. Wet firewood produced a lot of smoke and little heat, which was unacceptable in a confined space. Thanks to this system, it was always quiet inside the dwelling, as the air gap dampened the noise of rain and wind. This created a feeling of comfort and security necessary for proper rest. Psychological comfort was just as important as physical comfort. In the next chapter, you will learn what exactly was under their feet and why it was not just bare earth. The floor in an Indian camp was never just trampled earth, especially during the rainy season. It was a complex, multi-layered structure designed to insulate people from the cold and damp soil. The first layer consisted of thick mats woven from willow twigs or stiff grass. The willow twigs created an air cushion and allowed air to circulate under the beds, preventing rot. Rough, untreated skins were spread over the plant mats, fur side down. The stiff hide of these skins served as an excellent barrier to moisture that could rise from the ground. Moisture settled on the pile without penetrating higher to the finishing layers. These rough hides were regularly dried in the sun at the first opportunity. The top layer consisted of soft, carefully crafted bison blankets and fur skins. These were the actual sleeping and sitting areas, warm and comfortable. This structure resembled a modern camping mat and sleeping bag, but made of natural materials. The multi-layered structure made it easy to replace or clean individual elements. Particular attention was paid to the area around the hearth, where the risk of getting wet and dirty was highest. Flat stones or special woven mats that were easy to wash were often used there. The hearth itself was recessed so that the ashes would not scatter, and the edges of the pit were reinforced with clay or stones. This prevented dirt from spreading throughout the dwelling. Some tribes used special wooden headrests and backrests made of willow twigs. They not only provided comfort, but also raised the bedding above the floor. In the event of sudden flooding, things remained dry on these elevations. The furniture was light, portable, and moisture-resistant. Herbs such as sage or wormwood were often placed under the skins around the perimeter of the dwelling. They not only repelled insects with their smell, but also worked as an absorbent, soaking up excess moisture. The aroma of herbs created an atmosphere of freshness even in a closed room during long rains. Nature provided not only materials for construction, but also for hygiene. Shoes were always removed or thoroughly cleaned at the entrance so as not to bring dirt into the living area. Moccasins were stored in special bags hung on poles rather than thrown on the floor. Discipline and order were an integral part of protection against dirt and dampness. In a confined space, chaos would instantly lead to unsanitary conditions. Each family member had their own strictly defined place, which minimized unnecessary walking and mixing of bedding. The women's half, the men's half, and the guest area, all areas were clearly demarcated. This order helped to preserve the integrity of the floor covering. If the floor did get wet, the Indians did not hesitate to completely change the bedding and dry the ground with a bonfire. Prompt action to eliminate problems did not give dampness a chance to take root. The dwelling was constantly maintained, cleaned, and renovated. Such a floor was warm even in winter, allowing children to play and adults to sleep without the risk of catching a cold. Insulation from the ground was essential for maintaining health in the harsh climate of the plains. One of the most unique and recognizable features of the Indian teepee was the special smoke vents, which the Indians themselves often called ears. They were located at the very top of the cone of the dwelling and gave it its characteristic silhouette. This was not just a design detail, but a complex movable system that allowed for flexible adjustment of the size and direction of the smoke vent. Two long, thin poles located outside the dwelling were used to control these vents. The ends of the poles were inserted into special pockets at the corners of the leather panels. This allowed the inhabitants to control the roof of their home while standing on the ground without having to climb up. In skilled hands, these ears became an effective engineering tool for protection against the weather. When the sky was overcast with clouds and it began to rain, the valves were brought together by crossing the poles. This movement almost completely covered the opening at the top, creating a reliable canopy over the hearth. Only a small, narrow gap was left for smoke to escape, which was always turned away from the wind. Thanks to this clever trick, the rain hit the back of the leather flaps and ran down the cover. Water simply could not get inside the dwelling, as the wind carried the drops away from the opening. At the same time, smoke freely escaped outside under the protection of these overhanging flaps, carried away by the draft. If the wind suddenly changed direction, which often happened in the steppe, the inhabitants had to act quickly. Someone from the family would go outside and rearrange the poles, turning the flaps to face the wind. This took only a few seconds, but allowed them to react instantly to the vagaries of the changeable weather. The ability to position the ears correctly and in a timely manner was a real art, which children were taught from an early age. It was a responsibility on which the comfort of all the inhabitants depended. Incorrectly positioned valves guaranteed a house full of acrid smoke that made your eyes water and a floor flooded with water. During very heavy rain or a hurricane, when the opening had to be completely closed, the tactic was changed. The fire inside the dwelling was reduced to smoldering red coals so as not to create a lot of smoke. This allowed the heat to be retained without suffocating from the fumes in a tightly closed space. At such moments, the heat capacity of the stones lining the hearth played a huge role. Heated during the day, they maintained a comfortable temperature long after the flames had died down. The balance between heat retention, fresh air flow, and dryness was maintained in the hut at all times. The valves themselves were designed by craftsmen in a special way, with extreme conditions in mind. When closed, they fit tightly together, creating an almost airtight seal. Water could not seep into the joint between them due to the force of gravity, as the upper valve always covered the lower one. The design was thought out to the smallest detail, eliminating leaks in the most vulnerable place of any structure, at the top. The leather was stretched under the weight of the poles, preventing the formation of folds where water could accumulate. This ensured dryness even during prolonged autumn rains. The poles controlling the valves did not only function as levers, they also served as additional external supports, giving the entire structure stability in a storm. They were driven into the ground at an angle so that they acted as buttresses, resisting the wind. The entire system was rigid and reliable, yet remained flexible. This allowed the dwelling to withstand gusts of wind that would have destroyed a more static structure. The Tipi seemed to live its own life, adapting to the elements. In clear and sunny weather, the valves were opened as wide as possible, like a shirt collar. This allowed streams of bright sunlight to enter and provided powerful ventilation. The dwelling was quickly aired out from nighttime odors and disinfected by natural ultraviolet light. This preventive ventilation killed mold and damp odors. It was an important part of the sanitary struggle for the health of the family. On hot days, the open valves created a chimney effect, drawing hot air upward and creating coolness below. The material of the valves themselves was often smoked much more heavily and for longer than the rest of the tire. Soot and thick smoke deeply saturated the leather, making it dark, almost black. This created a powerful hydrophobic layer exactly where it was most needed, at the top of the house. The upper part of the dwelling was always the darkest and most protected from moisture. The smoked leather did not rot and served for years, withstanding constant changes in temperature and humidity. The Indians knew how to use smoke not only for food, but also for construction. This dynamic, living roof made Native American dwellings unique among all primitive structures in the world. No other structure built by nomadic peoples offered such flexibility in controlling the internal microclimate. It was not just a roof over their heads, but a complex and effective mechanism for life. The amazing waterproofness of Native American dwellings was the result not only of their successful conical shape, but also of the complex chemical treatment of the material. Raw bison hide alone was not suitable for building a durable house. When dried in the sun, it became hard and brittle, like plywood, and at the slightest sign of moisture, it began to rot and emit a foul odor. To turn this capricious material into a reliable fabric, the Indians used a unique method of brain tanning. It was a laborious process of transforming raw hides into soft, durable, and velvety suede. The craftswomen knew an ancient truth. Every animal has just enough brain to tan its own hide. The fats and emulsifiers contained in the animal's brain were rubbed into the clean skin by hand. They penetrated deep into the structure of the fibers, enveloping them and preventing them from sticking together as they dried. This made the material incredibly elastic and pleasant to the touch. However, the main secret of true water resistance was not tanning at all, but subsequent smoking. After being treated with brains, the finished skins were sewn into a bag-like shape and hung over a special pit. In this pit, they burned not ordinary firewood, but smoldering rotten wood of certain species, which produced thick, cold smoke. The smoke penetrated the deepest pores of the skin, entering into a chemical reaction with the collagen fibers. It enveloped them in a protective film, essentially preserving the material. Smoked leather not only acquired a beautiful golden or dark brown color, but also radically changed its properties, becoming water-resistant. When wet in the rain, this leather did not harden after drying. It remained soft and pliable, retaining its shape and texture. This was critically important for the nomads' mobile dwellings, which had to be frequently dismantled, transported on horses, and reassembled. Ordinary unsmoked leather would turn into a hard shell after the first heavy rain. When trying to fold it for transport, it would simply break at the folds like dry cardboard. Smoking, on the other hand, prolonged the life of the covering for many years, making it almost eternal. The sewing technique deserves special admiration. Pieces of leather were sewn together with tendons, which had an amazing natural property. When wet, these threads did not rot, but on the contrary swelled greatly, increasing in volume. The result was a paradoxical but effective mechanism. In dry weather, air passed through the microscopic needle holes, but when it rained, they became completely blocked. The swollen, wet tendon filled all the free space in the puncture. The stronger and longer it rained outside, the more airtight the dwelling became. It was a natural, self-regulating seal that did not require human intervention. A special glue was used for particularly important and stressed areas. It was boiled down from bison hooves, horns, and cartilage until it became a thick resin. This adhesive compound was applied to the joints and hinge attachment points for the poles, creating an additional waterproof layer. This glue was incredibly strong and elastic at the same time. It did not crack in the bitter cold or melt under the scorching summer sun, maintaining the airtightness of the structure. The regular smoke from the hearth, which burned inside the dwelling every day, constantly renewed the protective properties of the tires. The dwelling was continuously smoked from the inside throughout its life, becoming impregnated with resins and soot. Over the years, it only became more resistant to decay and pests. That is why old tires, blackened by time, were valued by their owners even more than new and beautiful ones. They had been tested by time, smoke, and hundreds of rains, proving their reliability. A new skin could still present a surprise, but an old one was a faithful friend. If the leather did start to get wet in places due to age, it could be rubbed with a mixture of internal fat and beeswax as an emergency measure. This was a kind of first aid for the old tire, allowing the family to survive the autumn rains in dry conditions. Caring for the material at home was a constant and difficult process, traditionally carried out by women. The bottom edge of the cover, which was in direct contact with the damp ground and wet grass, was the most vulnerable part of the entire structure. To save the main tent, the bottom was often made from coarser and cheaper parts of the hide. Sometimes a special replaceable strip was sewn on to take the brunt of the impact. When this bottom inevitably rotted from dampness, it was simply cut off and a new piece was sewn on. This meant that it was not necessary to replace the entire huge and valuable cover. This modular repair saved resources and time. Even the choice of the season for bison hunting directly affected the future quality of the walls of the house. Skins obtained in a certain season had the ideal thickness and density for building a dwelling. Summer skins with short hair were lighter and thinner, while winter skins were much warmer, heavier, and thicker. A deep understanding of the properties of natural materials allowed Native Americans to create complex composite structures. In terms of durability and comfort, they often surpassed many modern synthetic fabrics. It was true organic chemistry, born of thousands of years of experience surviving in the wild. The last and most reliable line of defense against the raging elements was the incredible mobility of the camp and the phenomenal ability to predict the weather. The Indians never waited passively for a storm to catch them off guard in an open field. They knew how to read the subtle signs of nature long before the first storm clouds appeared on the horizon. Any sudden change in wind direction or sky color told them a lot. Strange, frenzied behavior of ants hiding in the ground or birds flying too low were sure signs for immediate action. They could completely dismantle a huge camp and move to a safe place in an organized manner in less than an hour. If a destructive tornado or a particularly powerful hurricane was approaching, from which there was no escape, the tactics changed. The Indians did not try to fortify their dwellings, engaging in a futile struggle with the wind, but simply dropped them to the ground. The covers were quickly removed and the heavy poles were laid flat so that they would not break. The people themselves took shelter under heavy skins in natural depressions in the ground or ravines, waiting out the fury of the wind. Trying to hold a tall sail structure against such monstrous force would have been foolish and deadly dangerous. It was this flexibility of tactics that saved lives where the strength of stone walls would have been destroyed to the ground. Indian women could completely dismantle, neatly fold, and pack a teepee in just 15 minutes. They worked with surprising coordination and precision, without unnecessary words or fuss. It was a procedure honed over years to complete automatism, similar to a modern military alert. Every member of the tribe knew exactly what their task was at this critical moment. While some caught and bridled the horses, others gathered belongings, and still others knocked down the frame poles. Speed of reaction was their main and only insurance against sudden natural disasters. Their deep knowledge of the area allowed them to plan safe escape routes in advance in case of flooding or river overflow. They knew perfectly well which trails would remain solid and passable in the mud. They also remembered which lowlands would turn into deadly sticky traps for people and horses. The chiefs always had a plan B ready and marked out alternative campsites on high ground where the water would not reach. It was a strategy based on the memory of generations, not on luck. They never took chances when it came to the safety of their children. They knew how to accurately determine the approach of dangerous hail by the specific greenish color of the clouds and the characteristic rumbling in the sky. Large hail in the steppe was a terrible enemy, capable of piercing the stretched skin of a dwelling and maiming the people inside. In such cases, the tension of the covers was deliberately loosened. The skin began to sag and gently cushion the blows of the icy stones, instead of tearing under tension. It was a simple but ingenious physical technique that kept the roof over their heads. After the storm, the tires were stretched again, and life went on. In winter, the overall mobility of the camp inevitably declined due to deep snow and frost. Therefore, choosing a place for a long winter stay was a particularly careful and lengthy process. They left the open, windy plains for deep, wooded river valleys. There, protected by high banks and dense trees, the wind was not so fierce. In such places, they built more substantial fortifications and stockpiled huge piles of firewood. This was preparation for the long siege of cold weather that had to be endured until spring. The nomadic lifestyle itself was, by its very nature, the best protection against the accumulation of rubbish and disease. If a campsite became dirty or the resources around it were depleted, the tribe simply moved on. They did not live in filth for years on end, like the inhabitants of medieval cities. Even in the most difficult and frightening times, they maintained remarkable calm and deep respect for the forces of nature. Panic was considered an unacceptable weakness, as it inevitably led to mistakes in the destruction of the entire group. Ice-cold composure and knowledge were their main safeguards against death. The Indians never tried to conquer nature or bend it to their will. They danced a complex and dangerous dance with it, knowing in advance its every movement and every breath. That is why their light camps stood and survived where modern concrete structures would have been destroyed by the elements. We have seen that the protection from rain and wind provided by the indigenous peoples of America was not a matter of chance, but the result of a deep understanding of the laws of nature and physics. From the choice of location and analysis of the soil, to the aerodynamic shape of the dwelling and the chemistry of leather processing, everything was part of a single, perfect system. Their primitive technologies turn out to be the most complex engineering solutions, tested by centuries of harsh trials. They built their homes not in defiance of nature, but in harmony with it, using every slope, every gust of wind, and every drop of rain to their advantage. Would you like to try spending a night in such a traditional dwelling during a thunderstorm to test these principles for yourself? Or maybe you have your own secrets for setting up camp in bad weather. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about the ingenious inventions of the past.